All right. Hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers and Faith Unaltered and the Complete Sinner's Guide. Today is a special treat. It's an event in the making. We've been planning this for, I think, about a month and a half now to do the Great Miracle Debate. How do we identify these things that we call miracles, and are we ever warranted or justified in believing something, a given event is a miracle? So obviously, I'm going to be arguing the pro side. And on the other side is the famous atheist, Jordan, from the Reason to Doubt podcast. Hey, Jordan, how's it going?
I don't know how famous, but
You've made a name for yourself, I think, in shroud studies. I don't know how much you.
I guess so.
There you go. There you go. But yeah, just for the audience sake, obviously they know who you are and stuff, but do you want to give kind of a quick update as to what you've been up to or what's going on with your show?
Yeah. So if anybody doesn't know me, my name's Jordan. I'm an engineer and a skeptic, and also happen to be an atheist. So I run the Reason to Doubt YouTube channel. We have done some Shroud of Turin stuff recently, though. I don't know. Normally, this is where I tell you what I have coming up. I have absolutely no idea what's coming up, but
you just play it by ear, right?
Winging it.
There you go. Well, the good news is for me, I do know what I have coming up in the month of August. Nothing. I'm taking a nice, well-deserved rest. So, that should be good. But yeah, so basically, just so the audience knows, David was supposed to be here to moderate, but he got left at work, and I, like the knucklehead I am, I thought we were doing this debate on Friday night. So I literally found out 5 minutes ago that it's tonight, thanks to Jordan's email. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So good news is, like a good boy, I prepared in advance. So I am ready to go with my opening. So yeah, apart from that, are you ready to get into it? I guess I can give my opening and then turn it to you.
Yep, that works.
Cool. So let me share my screen here. All right. Should be. All right. Is that? Are you seeing the PowerPoint there?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Okay. So, obviously, since I'm moderator, we'll be flexible with the time. Just take as long as you need, since David's not here to do the time. But okay, great. So my thing is the positive case for identifying miracles. This is premise 8 in my 11 premise argument. And so there are some debate presuppositions here. So number one, I'm assuming that God exists, obviously, for this debate. And by God, I just mean he's a real, maximally great being, as Eugen Nagasawa defines him. Secondly, God has at least one goal, and one of those goals is that as many human beings as possible achieve their ultimate purpose in creation, whatever that is. And religious divine revelations, they're one means God could use to achieve that. And then finally is the assumption that God cannot allow for any what I call undue confusion. And that's just confusion that would unjustifiably, on God's part, hinder achieving the goal of as many humans as possible achieving their ultimate purpose. So those are some of the assumptions that I have in this debate. Okay, great. So what the heck is a miracle? What are we talking about here? And miracles typically refer to a special type of event that only God and or those he delegates his power to can bring about. There's been many definitions. If you look in the philosophical literature of what a miracle is, one of the more popular notions among atheists today is that, well, it's something supernatural, beyond nature, or is a quote unquote violation of the laws of nature. I think that this nomenclature is just totally unhelpful, especially when you're talking with someone who subscribes to naturalism. I think these kind of things cause more division and misunderstanding. So I prefer to go with a more ancient approach, right? And the Bible describes miracles as signs and wonders. There's something that they're a wonder, they're remarkable, to the ordinary person, and they serve as a sign for something. And that's the understanding that kind of undergirds my own understanding, where I say that miracles are simply events that are quote unquote intelligently designed by God, either directly or indirectly, to achieve a given divine purpose or specified purpose. Okay, so how do I go about identifying these events? Well, like I said, I think intelligent design theory is a great way to go. And we detect intelligent design in everyday life all the time. So Bill Dembski has this trichotomy rule, where there's three types of explanations that people are aware of. There's regularities, so these are high probability events. There's also random chance events, and then there are events that are intelligently designed. And there are examples that we see every day with humans as the intelligent agent. So Mount Rushmore, this was obviously not formed by wind and erosion or something like that. No, humans intelligently designed it. Or language, if you see the words written on a beach, John loves Sally. Obviously, that those words were intelligently designed because of that semiotic dimension, as John Lennox would say. Or SETI, detecting human life through receiving certain mathematical patterns from outer space. Or finally, another great example, one that William Lane Craig gives, and I'll be showing a clip from him in a second. But imagine we have a guy named Bob. Bob was born on January 5th, 1981. And on his 40th birthday, one of his friends gives him a car as a gift. And guess what? It has a license plate reading Bob 1581. You would be obtuse to go, oh, well, improbable events happen every day. That just obviously happened by random chance. No, we obviously are reasonable in saying this person intelligently designed that license plate to match up with his birth date. Okay, so what is it that underpins all of these examples? I think that it's Bill Dembski's criteria of specified complexity. And this is what allows us to infer intelligent design in a given example. All of the above examples do have that. So here's just a little clip. So do you mind if I show the clip, or should I
do whatever you want?
Okay. All right. It's just a quick little 1-minute clip. Where the heck is it? All right. And like I said, when you do your opening, feel free to take as long as you want to, since I'm doing this. And the time stamps are 1 hour, 1 minute. Okay. All right. So can you see that, the YouTube?
Yep.
Or the
And you can hear it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, perfect.
improbability issue here. It's the probability of having a life-permitting universe. To give an analogy, suppose Bob is given a car for his birthday, and the license plate has on it CHT 4271. Now, there are millions of license plate numbers, and that number is highly improbable, yet it would occasion no special interest. But suppose Bob was born on August 8, 1949, and he finds on his birthday card the license plate BOB 8849. He would be obtuse if he just shrugged this off and said, oh, well, nothing to be explained about that. Any number is equally improbable, and there had to be some number on the car. But what makes this case different than the other? It is the combination of high improbability with an independently given pattern that results in what design theorists call specified complexity. And it is that tips us off to the fact that this is not due to chance, it is due to design. So again, the theist finds himself comfortably within mainstream science. It is not
Okay, so that was the point that I wanted you to get from the video. There's those two elements, right? That event-independent pattern, plus it's a sufficiently improbable event to occur given ordinary natural events and mechanisms and that sort of thing. Okay, so let's look a little bit at what these criteria in turn. So what is specification? What are we talking about? So this just means that, look, there's an event, a pattern that conforms to an event. An event conforms to an event independent pattern. So the pattern itself is the specification. In the example here, it's Bob's birth date, right? This is obviously an independent pattern. Bob's birthday was August 4th, 1941, or whatever it is, independently of whether he gets a car with Bob 88441 on his license plate or not, right? So that's what we mean. This is a pattern that it's a delimited pattern, something that we can detect as a pattern, and it's detachable from the event itself. So that's what we mean by something being specified. What about complexity? Well, obviously, we're talking about the probability of an event's occurrence. And in this case, it has to be smaller than the relevant probability bound. And that's where we go, okay, it's complex. So it's not random chance or something like that. And obviously, there are differences between localized universal probability bounds. For our purposes here, we don't really need to get into those details, and you'll see why as I get to the part on miracles. But the point here to get is that we have to have a saturated probability. So that means that, we are looking at the probability, taking account of all the probabilistic resources, and then comparing that to this probability bound. So that's what complexity is. Great. So let's apply this to the religion authenticating miracles as being intelligently designed events. So philosophers have typically identified miracles as events that are highly improbable or impossible given the laws of nature or natural. And they take place, as Mike Licona says, within a context charged with religious significance. So for example, someone being instantly healed of their disease right after God, they pray to God to be healed. This would be a miracle of compassion, for example. In this debate, I'm sort of specifically focused on a special subset of miracle, what I call religion authenticating miracles, because that's what I've done my work on. And I think that basically we can identify religion authenticating events as being events that exhibit specified complexity, because think about it, they are delimited, right? The pattern of, okay, if God exists and he gave divine revelation and he wants to authenticate that divine revelation, giving a miracle, that's an independent pattern, regardless of whether God ever did perform miracles or ever gave divine revelation, or even if God doesn't even exist, we can conceive of that pattern independent of observing the event of God raising Jesus from the dead, or taking Muhammad up in a winged horse and flying around Jerusalem, whatever it is. So I would argue that religion authenticating miracles are in fact specified. Additionally, by definition, miracles are remarkable or extraordinary events. Remember, the Bible uses the word signs and wonders. And in this way, humans perhaps could say, well, they are very sufficiently improbable to occur. This gives us complexity and specification to say these events must be intelligently designed. Okay, so here are my specific criteria for how I figure out if a given event is in fact specified or not. So in the first place, the event has to be sufficiently attached to a religion. So this is kind of what I was already talking about before. The event takes place in a context charged with religious significance. And I gave the example of someone being healed, let's say after a Christian pastor prays to God for them to be healed. But that alone is not enough. This is where I go beyond other philosophers and why I'm specifically focusing on a subset of miracles for the specified purpose of authenticating religion. So the event, the miracle, has to serve to authenticate the religion. That's the purpose or the end goal of the event. So I give the example, miracles associated with a religious founder who claims that these kinds of miracles actually prove or that God approves of his religious message. Yeah, that would serve to authenticate the religion if the event actually happened and that sort of thing. Then finally, number three is the issue of subsumability. And again, this is something that I think I'm unique in that nobody else has really talked about in the literature. But the event itself can't be subsumable to another religion. So, you have example, the virgin birth. Well, Christians aren't the only one who believe in that. Muslims do too. The virgin birth is a part of Islam. So if we could prove that the virgin birth happened, who gets it? Does it prove Christianity or does it prove Islam? And my thoughts here are that the first religion chronologically to claim a given event by default gets it. I think this is what the reasonable real seeker would assume, unless the later subsuming religion fulfills three sets of sub-criteria. So the first is that the religion itself can't be contradictory with the event's occurrence. So an example here is many people, I disagree with this, but many Christians and stuff will argue that, well, if we could prove Jesus rose from the dead, that can't be subsumed by Islam because the Quran contradicts it. It says Jesus didn't die and rise from the dead, for example. Secondly, the subsuming religion has to have its own independent religion authenticating miracle. And finally, thirdly, the subsuming religion has to have an overall probability of greater than 50% in terms of it being true or being the religion that God endorses for us to follow. If it doesn't meet these criteria, then the original this miracle serves to authenticate the original religion. And I think that's what the reasonable real seeker would do, would think. Okay, now we're on the complexity aspect of religion authenticating events. So remember, one of my presuppositions is that God would not allow for any undue confusion among any reasonable real seekers. So this is a specific subset, right? So by reasonable, I'm just using the civil court legal definition. Average person, it's a semi-objective test, right? So there's average person with average intelligence, with average discernment, average knowledge base, the average peep. And then there's also this real seeker thing. So again, I've defined, there are three criteria for that. It's a person who is sincerely open-minded to the truth of a given religion, finding out what the true religion is, if any. They're actively doing their best to seek the religion that's true, again, if any. And upon discovery of that truth, they would be willing to obey and follow. That's what that is. Now here's, in terms of the probability bound, this is probably going to be controversial, but I argue that for the reasonable real seeker, this average person who's really seeking the true religion, look, less than 50%, if you have a saturated probability less than 50%, that's sufficient for a reasonable real seeker. I think that's the level God would operate on, because, think about it. The signs and wonders or religion authenticating miracles work for people back in the Stone Age just as much as the quantum physicists today. So I think that that is a sufficient probability bound for religion authenticating events. And again, because God can't allow any undue confusion, that allows us to claim warrant, even though there's some relativity in this criteria itself. Okay, so stupid glasses. Okay, and one thing I say here, in terms of calculating the saturated probability, another qualification is, look, most reasonable real seekers, we're not statisticians. Trust me, I was looking at potential objections in preparing for this debate today, and I can't make heads or tails of them. I have no idea how to calculate the saturated probability or how many probabilistic resources are available for Jesus' resurrection or something like that. But again, because the standard is the reasonable real seeker, and God is there to prevent me from being unduly confused, and therefore I'm warranted regardless of my limitations, I do think that we can still argue that normative probabilities or subjective-based probabilities, again, if you fulfill the criteria for being a reasonable real seeker, that's good enough. That's sufficient to go, yes, this event is complex. A human being rising from the dead, truly rising from the dead, that's extremely improbable. And I think in 99% of the cases, most of us can get that difference and be warranted and stuff like that. Okay. Okay. So my criteria for determining if something is complex. So the first way to do it is the standard mechanistic argument. So this is kind of the standard way, right? So people will either argue, look, all the currently well-known or well-established ordinary natural mechanisms are improbable or impossible, right? So that's what Richard Swinburne argues, the violations of a law of nature. And notice again, all currently well-known or established ordinary natural mechanisms, so that we're not responsible to well, what about the future and unknown mechanisms? Don't know, don't care. The reasonable real seeker just has to assess the currently well-known and well-established ones. That's all they're responsible for, and God is playing the role of preventing undue confusion on that front. Okay, the second way we can do that is to say, well, an event is extraordinary if it's unique, despite sufficient opportunities for duplication in a ordinary natural context, right? So, there are different types of opportunities. There are natural opportunities and there are artificial opportunities. So in the case of the shroud images, for example, one might argue, well, look, billions of people have been buried in burial shrouds and only the Shroud of Turin has images. There's been a sufficient natural opportunity for duplicate images of some random guy. Why doesn't Julius Caesar have a burial shroud or something like that? You can make that argument. I don't think that works for the shroud, but that's beside the point. And then there's artificial. So these are field and lab experiments that can provide opportunities deliberately for duplication of a given event. Point is here in general, if an event remains unique to religion, authenticating context, or extraordinary contexts, despite a sufficient opportunity, the common person, that's a complex event. That's an extraordinary event. That is a wonder, a sign. And then thirdly, there's extraordinary circumstances. So this is a bit harder to do, but maybe things like the timing of an event. So it's not the event itself that's extraordinary, but the circumstances surrounding it. So I just gave the example, in the movie The Nativity Story, it has a totally ordinary natural event, like the Jupiter, the Saturn, and some kind of star. They all just happen to align. But why would a reasonable real seeker think that this is complex or extraordinary? Well, it's the timing. It just so happened right over Bethlehem on the time of Jesus' birth. Someone might try to argue it's extraordinary that way. So, those are my criteria there. Sorry, this is taking so long, but okay, very quickly, I'm almost at the end. So, okay, now, in addition to the a posteriori evidence, there is the issue that always comes up, the prior probability of a religion authenticating miracle. Okay, so basically, the prior probability for God performing a religion authenticating miracle, if we, in the specific circumstance, we can detect the presence of a religious or religion authenticating context, remember, through the criteria for specification, that's how we would do that. I argue that the prior probability will always be 50-50. It just depends. Well, did God have a sufficient religious motivation to do a miracle in this case or not? And as Jordan knows in our last debate, he kind of made a great argument about there's a low prior probability about the carbon dating being explainable by residual thing versus some supernatural neutron flux or something like that. And he said, well, look, we should opt. It's very low probability given our precedents and past experience that it would be some remarkable event. But not if there's a presence of a religion authenticating event. That is a game changer. And that's where I say the prior probability is 50-50 because of who God is. And again, it all just depends on, does he have that sufficient motivation to do this miracle or not. Now, there are a couple of skeptical arguments. Yeah, I guess I'll give it since I'm taking so long. Sorry, guys. Like I said, I had 5 minutes, and I've never practiced going through this, so I know it's very wordy. But okay, so a lot of atheists and skeptics will kind of give this. You hear this all the time, right? So with the case of the resurrection, for example, they'll say, well, look, the prior probability of Jesus, God raising Jesus from the dead as a miracle, it's extremely low. Look at all the billions and trillions of people throughout all of human history, and God has raised practically zilch. So it's like a 1 out of billion chance or something like that. And I just say, again, this is totally missing the point. This is the wrong reference class. It's irrelevant about whether God raises people randomly from the dead who have no religious importance. No, look, the presence of that religion authenticating context is what demarcates Jesus as within a specific reference class of person where, yeah, it's equally probable God could have had sufficient motivation to raise him or not. So what he does with Tom, Dick, and Harry, who cares? These guys are not within a religious authenticating context. So we wouldn't, of course, we would use, prior context, but that's not what we're doing. We're not asking what is the prior probability that God would just randomly raise Jesus as a random person from the dead. That's not what we're doing here. I'll skip over 2, but this is a more nuanced one based on God's MO and looking at, yeah, I'll skip over that just to save time. So, final slide here as a potential objection, because I'm using specified complexity or intelligent design theory to kind of underpin my criteria for miracles. Well, an obvious objection that I always get is, don't you know that Bill Dembski and intelligent design is a joke? Evolution is true. What are you, some kind of whack job creationist or something like that? All I'm going to say is, look, this objection is totally irrelevant to my argument here tonight. I'm not arguing for creation versus evolution. Let's just assume evolution is totally true for the sake of argument. I do tend to believe in intelligent design theory myself, kind of thing, but pretend I'm totally wrong. Throw that in the garbage. Natural evolution is true. That has no bearing on my argument here, because people are basically objecting and saying, look, all that this proves is Bill Dembski misapplied his criteria to evolution. Maybe he got the biological facts wrong. He's not a biologist. Who cares? The point is that his criteria are still valid and apply to many other disciplines. And I gave that list of examples when I first started, where we can clearly detect the presence of specified complexity in patent protection, information theory. This is being used in AI studies. And interestingly, AI is a supposed falsification that maybe Jordan will point to of specified complexity, and we can get into that a bit. But my point here is that, look, this doesn't matter, because evolution, the misapplication of the criteria to the field of biology, does not falsify specified complexity themselves in general. For that, you need objections to the criteria themselves, not their application to the field of biology or something like that. And secondly, don't forget, again, we have this standard of the reasonable real seeker. So even if you did disprove somehow a specified complexity, let's say one of the falsifications is real, remember our standard, I would still argue that the reasonable real seeker in today's culture would still be justified in believing events are, in inferring intelligent design on the basis of specified complexity. So with that, I will shut up. And how long was I, Jordan? Hopefully I wasn't that long, but
I wasn't timing it. I have no idea, to be honest.
No worries. Well, now it's time for me to totally shut up. And Jordan, you get to give your opening for as long as you need.
Sure. I just want to say, I put it in the comments, but if I lose, it's because the moderator is biased. I just want to point that out. Okay.
It's already predetermined. There's specific complexity here. So.
Right, exactly. Confirmed predictions. All right. So I don't have any slides. So you're just going to have to look at me while I talk. Today's debate is we're talking about whether we can rationally identify miracles of God. Now, there are some of my fellow atheists who insist the answer is necessarily no. And even if Jesus himself came down on a fiery chariot and like rearranged the stars in the sky before their very eyes, they wouldn't believe. I think that's silly. The answer is obviously yes, in some sense. Given sufficient evidence, it's rational to believe just about anything, and miracles, I don't think, are an exception to that. But it's no fun to talk about stuff we agree on, and where I think Dale and I are likely to disagree are on what counts as sufficient evidence, like what we would actually need to rationally believe. So let's talk about that. Now, when it comes to an event that's identified as miraculous, we need enough evidence to justify belief that the event in question occurred, and that the event was caused or designed or whatever by God. Since something can't be caused or designed by God that doesn't exist, the evidence would need to be sufficient to warrant belief in that deity, unless you came to the table with that belief already for other reasons. How much is enough will always be a subjective judgment. I tend to think in Bayesian terms, and so I would say that miracles have an extremely low prior probability. That is just a fancy way of saying that you would need a lot of evidence to reasonably believe it. I think this for a few reasons. Genuine miracles, if they occur at all, are rare. Most things that happen in the universe are just interactions of ordinary matter that's perfectly explicable by natural laws and don't seem to have any significance as a sign or wonder at all. And so miracles are a rare occurrence. Not only this, but miracle claims are very often wrong. Even if you think miracles are a real thing, I'm sure most people won't disagree that there's a lot of people claiming that a miracle happened and there's no miracle, they're just mistaken. So those reasons alone would justify a low prior for any new claim that came up. And that's true even if you accept that miracles can happen sometimes. But I think it gets worse because remember that for a miracle to be possible at all, God must exist. So that means accepting this miracle claim, if we don't come to the table with that belief already, that would require us to fundamentally alter our perception of reality in order to accommodate not just the supernatural, whatever that means, but specifically a supremely powerful personal being that's utterly unlike anything else that exists. This is an important point, so I think it's worth emphasizing. So far as anyone can tell, the laws of physics always apply to all things, and they haven't changed significantly with time. We've encountered no verified exceptions. So if you want me to believe that there is a hitherto unknown exception to this rule, I should require some truly stellar evidence to believe that. If you're still not convinced, imagine this. Suppose someone claims that hyper-advanced aliens have visited Earth. In fact, I think right now there's some people testifying before Congress that very thing has happened. I think we would all rightly be extremely skeptical of that claim and require excellent evidence to believe them. That is to say, we'd all agree that it has a low prior. And I think we have good reasons to do so. We've never observed life outside of Earth. The universe is extremely big. The odds of alien life appearing near us would seem to be low. The technology they'd need would be staggering, etc. But at a kind of like a basic level, believing that there are hyper advanced aliens out there isn't like crazy. They would be presumably beings kind of like us, and we already know that's possible. With regards to the technology, you can see our rapid advance of technology in just the last 10,000 years. How much further along would a species go if they got, say, 1,000,000-year head start, or 2 million, or 10? In other words, a hyper advanced alien species existing is really just a difference in degree from what we already know is possible. And it's not like a fundamentally different type of thing. So I would contend that however low you set the prior for these aliens existing and visiting Earth, and I think you should set it quite low indeed, the prior for a God existing who intervenes on Earth should be much lower than that. But hey, who cares if miracles have low prior? Because low priors, even extremely low priors, can be overcome with good evidence. So let's circle back to those evidential hurdles that have to be clear. Remember, we have to have enough to think the event happened and that it was caused by God. So the first hurdle is where most miracle claims fail, particularly those from the distant past. For one simple reason, they tend to rely entirely on personal testimony, by which I mean like some person is relating a story either that they witnessed or said they witnessed, or they're hearing whatever. It's some story from a person. This is problematic because for any individual's testimony of a miracle, there are always going to be far more likely alternative explanations for that testimony. It's a well-established fact that humans regularly lie or are honestly mistaken. Yet, whether the person in question who's giving us their testimony, whether they saw the miracle legitimately, or they're lying about seeing a miracle, or they believe they saw a miracle, but they're wrong, the testimony may look the same. And it's especially hard to tell the difference when we're decades or even centuries removed from that event and can't question the person directly. To borrow from Hume, no testimony is sufficient to establish a miracle unless the falsehood of that testimony would be more miraculous than the miracle it's trying to establish. So because of this, I think it's going to be very difficult to establish that a that a miraculous event from the distant past actually happened. I think it could be done in principle, but in practice, I don't think we're likely to actually have the kind of evidence we would need. Now, most of what I just said applies to the flashier sorts of miracles, your resurrections, your divine healings, your waters into wines, that sort of thing. And if that sort of stuff happened, you'd know that it's definitely not natural. It's some kind of supernatural thing, right? But that's not the only kind of miracle that one could imagine. As Dale alluded to, you could imagine that God does something natural or causes something natural to happen in just such a way to fit his plans. So, an auspicious solar eclipse or a meteor impact that destroys a particularly sinful city or whatever, something like that. These are things that could have happened naturally, but they happen at a time or place or in a manner that is suggestive to someone who's watching. And so in these cases, it might actually be very easy to establish that the event occurred. We might have archaeological evidence. If it happened in the present day, we might have newspaper articles and videos and all sorts of cool stuff. Unfortunately, at that point, that's where you really run into that second hurdle, showing that God was the cause. This really isn't a problem for those flashy miracles. Like if, a dude like multiplies fish or like gets up from the dead, you probably get something for free. You may wonder which god it is, but something's happening, right? But if something occurs that is consistent with natural laws and could have happened even if God didn't exist, well, why not just go with that then? Why add extra fundamental layers to reality to explain something that evidently already has a perfectly valid explanation? Now, I'm not the first one to note this problem, and some apologists have offered a potential solution that Dale included in his opening. If an unlikely event occurred in a context charged with religious significance, that's how Mike Licona puts it, then that should give us confidence that it was indeed a miracle. What counts as a context charged with religious significance is kind of squishy, but I take it to mean something like the resurrection that happened at the end of Jesus' ministry, where like that would point towards a specific God, or perhaps a prayer group beseeching God for intervention, and then that intervention happens, stuff like that. And I think this idea has some merit, but I don't think it's particularly useful for establishing whether or not a miracle happened. We have to remember that for every context charged with religious significance that has or is alleged to have had something remarkable occur, there are going to be countless others that go on without anything having happened at all. There's all for every prayer meeting that ends up in a miraculous healing, there's many, many, many more that didn't. And so we should be careful to avoid confirmation bias by ignoring all of the misses and only looking at the hits. Now, I know Dale isn't focused on divine healings, but I think it's helpful to just like illustrate this point. Imagine someone prays for their loved one to recover from cancer, say, and then next week it goes into spontaneous remission. That is a low probability event. It happened in a religious context, all checks all the boxes. But what if almost every person who has cancer has someone praying for them? Well, in that case, it's only a matter of time before one of those prayers works, right? If you pray often enough for the same thing, that can happen. Eventually, it's going to happen after you prayed. But nobody's going to tell stories about all those prayers, that didn't work. They're going to tell stories about the one that did, right? That's just human nature. Likewise, religion is widespread among humans. And so there's going to be a lot of religiously significant context for stuff to happen in. And that's true whether or not God is acting. So all that said, I think the criteria would be useful if you were just trying to figure out who got credit once you've established a God happened. And Dale kind of alluded to this, where it's like, which religion, which God should you apportion this to? So if we were somehow able to show this is a miracle, it couldn't have happened naturally, or whatever criteria we want to say, yes, check, it's a miracle. Who should we be praising? Then at that point, I think it would be reasonable to say, well, if it happened in a Christian context, like Jesus' resurrection, that would point towards the Christian God more than, say, Odin. You couldn't necessarily rule out that like another like trickster god was involved or something, but I would be happy to go with the more obvious conclusion unless I had reason not to. So I've got another reason why I think we should prefer natural explanations to supernatural ones. It's not very sophisticated. They just have a better track record. The past is absolutely littered with phenomena that have been credited to supernatural beings, from earthquakes to volcanoes to the motions of the stars. In each and every instance of these things, there's been a point in history where humans have looked at that, didn't understand it, and they credited some deity with that. And in all of those instances, the explanation has gone from miracle to natural. Never once has the reverse occurred. Now, this doesn't mean that that trend is guaranteed to continue. That is not a guarantee of future success. Perhaps all of those other times that miracles were given as the reason or whatever, that was a mistake. But this time it's real. This time we got it right. That is certainly a thing that can happen. But I think this history we'd be well advised to remain skeptical, and again to have that low prior. So to sum up, genuine miracles are rare if they happen at all. Miracle claims are often mistaken, and accepting miracles, if you don't already believe in a deity, requires accepting a fundamentally different reality. And so we should require excellent evidence in order to accept that. The testimony of an individual or small group of individuals alone cannot be, by itself, cannot be that excellent evidence that we need, because there's always going to be other more plausible explanations. And unfortunately, that's the only type of evidence we are likely to have for miracles in the distant past. For miracles that could have happened naturally, but are alleged to be events that are guided by God for whatever purpose that he or she had, we should avoid adding complications. If we have a natural explanation, just go with the natural explanation. Excuse me. Finally, remember, and I know Dale knows this, but I get this kind of comment all the time. We'd want to avoid being hasty to plug God into any hole in our knowledge. I don't know what caused this doesn't mean, therefore, we do know, and what caused it was God, right? Sometimes I don't know just means I don't know. And that's it.
All right, excellent, perfect. So, okay, yeah. So I'm not going to write it down, but yeah. So I think what we can do now at this point, maybe just do some time period, like quick cross examine, or just kind of ask each other questions about our cases. So yeah, let me start with your opening case. So okay, so 2 points that you made, totally agree with, right? So the first one I agree with is your last one about God of the gaps reasoning is wrong. Look, I don't know, just means you don't know. You can't say I don't know, therefore, and then infer God. But I would okay, so this is cross-examine. Would you also agree that naturalism of the gaps is just as fallacious reasoning?
So maybe I think it's a little bit different because we both agree that the natural world exists to some extent. There may be more to it than that. But we can agree that there are natural laws that usually apply, and things tend to work that way. And so that would kind of be my default position for anything, is to go with what was already established. So to the extent that either gets to be a default, it seems like the natural explanation would get to be that default because it's extremely well established. That said, I don't know doesn't mean therefore it's natural. It means I don't know. It's just not going to sway me away from my natural worldview because I don't know.
Gotcha. All right, cool. And the other point that so you are apparently the alpha and omega. It was the first point you made. So this is absolutely correct. That look, my argument here for miracles presupposes and assumes that God exists, and that's why that's premise one in my argument. That's foundational kind of thing. We've got to do the work, because you're not going to just take my word for it. Well, I'm the moderator, so you'll do what I say. But I'm sure after you're off the show, yeah, that guy's full of cheat.
Well, don't worry. I'm going to post this on my own channel, edited heavily. So
okay, good. I would expect no less. But yeah, so it's total. There's no question. You're just totally right there. Do you understand, when I say God, it's also a specific type of God, namely minimally. He's a real maximally great being. So he's has all of the great making properties to the maximal possible degree. You give me that, my argument can follow. Would you?
I think that if you can come to the table with the existence of a deity, even if you don't know which one, already established. Well, then the prior for probability for miracles goes way up because you've got a mechanism for it, right? Like
Mhm.
if we know that God exists and God has the power, at least, even if perhaps not the inclination, but at least has the capability to intervene in nature. Well, then it's just a question of whether or not he did in this particular instance. That's a way different question, you know. Like,
Let me, so this isn't relevant to my case, but just out of curiosity, if you don't mind me asking, let me flip it around, because there are theists. I'm not sure I agree with this approach, but there are theists, Lydia McGrew or Tim McGrew, where there's this argument. They don't assume God exists, but they say that miracles can prove God exists. It's an argument for God from miracles. I don't do that in my approach, but what are your kind of thoughts on that? Do you think that there's any merit to that?
I think there could be in principle. I can imagine if God is, maximally great and can do whatever he wants, then again, I don't go along with Matt Dillahunty and others who are like, imagine like God wrote a Bible verse on the moon. Like, well, I would assume I'm hallucinating. Like, come on, like, let's be real here. Like, if like, yes, it could be like, and again, if I was the only one who saw it, then maybe I'm hallucinating, right?
Yeah.
And like maybe if me and my other buddies also kind of all saw it and we agreed, okay, maybe we're hallucinating. But if like the entire planet sees this thing and then we send a rocket out there and it's there, like at some point I just have to accept that the reality I'm experiencing is real and just go with it, right? So like I could imagine there are miracles such that it would be authenticating for a deity, or at the very least that there's more to reality than we currently understand, right?
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, I don't think we get those, at least not in modern times. And again, because of the not exactly Hume's objection, but kind of similar, I'm very skeptical of our capability to establish miracles like that in the past. Well, a miracle like that would be, you get it though. Like,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to establish miracles in the past because we just don't have access to the kind of evidence we'd need.
Yeah, that is some excellent segue, because that was the next point that I wanted to kind of probe you a little bit on. So, okay, so in the first place, you kind of are giving an objection to against a specific type of miracle or a subset, right? Like one's religion authenticating miracles that are from the distant past, and the only evidence we have is testimonial evidence. So, again, you give other reasons, but like obviously you're kind of open then to saying this objection doesn't say anything about, well, what about maybe we don't need to rely on testimony, God gives a miracle for every generation or something like that. And
so depending on the nature of the miracle, you might still need it today. Like, for instance, I've got all kinds of people who have told me that, God healed my cousin of this thing, or, my brother's hairdressers, whatever, saw this. Like, that's also testimony. Like, I have that doesn't do anything for me,
Okay.
So if the miracle is being attested just by testimonies, a story someone is telling me, then that's never going to be enough for me to believe, if it's like an individual. And I mentioned the past just because when it comes to the past, that is the only thing we're likely to ever have. Whereas if it happens in the present, we're much more likely to be able to possibly get better evidence. I don't think, though, that this is like in principle the only evidence we could have had. So, for example, suppose that the Mormons are kind of close to right, and Jesus went on a road trip after his resurrection and went around and went up to every single person on the planet, shook their hand and said, "Hey, I'm Jesus, I'm your Lord and Savior," and had a conversation. And that was reported across the whole planet about the same time, even with unconnected cultures. I'd be convinced. That would convince me, right? Obviously we don't have that, and we're not likely to have that. So I don't go as far as Hume. Well, I'm not sure if this is exactly what Hume's saying. I don't go as far as people say Hume goes, and says never ever could you ever have a testimony that's sufficient. I lean on the one phrase he gives, which the miraculous nature of the testimony being wrong would have to be more than the miracle. If every single person on the planet testified to the same thing, that'd be more miraculous to me. Right.
Let me probe this a bit, and I might have to, because there's been work by philosophers on the epistemology of testimony, and there are two main views, right? So David Hume and yourself seem to be advocating for a reductionist understanding, right? So testimony testimony isn't to be believed as evidence unless you have non-testimonial reasons for justifying your belief in that testimony. So you need some kind of independent testimony, independent evidence first. Other philosophers, myself included, I take a non-reductionist stance. So this testimony is another basic element of evidence, right? So it's to be believed unless it is defeated in some way. So yeah, I guess I don't know if you've heard about this debate at all, but like,
Yeah.
why are you
So,
assuming a reductionist?
so I understand that like most of the knowledge I have came to me via testimony in some way or another, via a teacher or some scientist telling me his results, and I didn't look at it myself. So I get all that. And I don't necessarily disagree with that.
Okay.
But if we're looking for the most probable explanation for the evidence we have before us, it's not that I'm saying it's testimony, therefore it's not to be believed. I'm saying I've been given this evidence. It happens to be testimonial evidence. What are the possible explanations that I could have for the evidence that I have? And one explanation is that this testimony of, let's just use the resurrection just as a potential thing. That what one explanation that I have, this person that says they saw someone rise from the dead, is that they saw the person rise from the dead. That's one explanation. But I also have competing explanations that they're lying for whatever reason, that they are mistaken. They thought they saw it, but they're wrong, or, whatever. There's a whole suite of other options. And only one of them requires me to add a fundamental layer to reality, right? Whereas the other ones only have humans doing things humans do. And so it's not like, I'm not trying to put testimony like its own special unreliable class. I'm saying that because of the nature of testimony and the nature of human beings,
Gotcha. Yeah, I think just to kind of back you up. So I would disagree about. I think that testimony 9 times out of 10 is 8 times out of 10, let's say, it is reliable as a general category. But in specific cases, such as the one we're talking about, miracle testimony, I think it does come attached with certain inherent defeaters because we have this precedent of so many counterfeits out there, which was another point you made, and stuff like that. So there are inherent defeaters that those in turn need to be defeated, and that's why I've given my criteria as a defeater, so to speak. Does that make sense, or am I talking gibberish?
Yeah, I understand.
Cool. Okay, so there's another point, but I can't read it because of my glass. Rare event. Religion authenticating events are rare events.
Miracles are rare, is what I said.
Even miracles are rare.
Authentic, yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So I guess my kind of thoughts, not to be rude, is like, well, no, duh. Like, why does that matter? Because they are inherently supposed to be rare events, right? Especially if we're talking about specifying religion authenticating events. Presumably, there's only one religion that is divine revelation. We would expect, I would argue, and I'll ask you your thoughts, but I would say we would expect them to be rare because they have to serve as signs and wonders, something extraordinary that we don't see every day that's signifying this religion, follow it. And you go, wow, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this. So wouldn't we expect it to be a rare event?
I'm not convinced that we would necessarily. Because so I can imagine that if a deity had as a goal to make sure that everybody knew who he was, so that every person had the ability to follow them, because you couldn't follow someone you have no reason to think exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could certainly imagine a world where every single person has a direct experience with this deity. And it happens all the time. Like, it's not like he's on a, calling plan. He can only call so often, he can do it as often as he wants,
Mm-hmm.
And so every single one of us gets a doubting Thomas demonstration. And maybe some people are like, you know what, you're real. And I think you're a dick and I'm not going to follow you. Okay, cool. Like, fine. I get it. And I could also understand if perhaps God was like, well, I'm God. So I know that if I did it and showed you, you still wouldn't follow me. So it's not worth my time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm going to go all the way there, but okay, fair enough. If that's the case, in that case, still, I would expect it to be way less rare than it is. Surely there are at least some people who haven't had a divine experience who would have benefited. By benefit, I mean they would have believed, had they had it, right? So I don't necessarily think that the fact that it's rare, like I can see the logic, but I don't think it's a given. Like,
gotcha. Like you're kind of hinting that it's not that it's rare or less frequent compared to ordinary natural events, but it's that it's for you it might be too infrequent. Like maybe there should be 3 instead of 2 instances or
well,
something.
that wasn't the thing I was exactly saying, but like I don't think it's necessarily a given that miracles ought to be like that we should expect them to be rare if God existed. I don't necessarily think that's the case. But
Okay.
what I was saying is basically if I'm confronted with like someone saying this thing happened to me and it's a very rare thing, whether it's a miracle or not, if it's a thing that almost never happens, then all else being equal, and I don't mean that by like the mundane kind of rare where like I had a license plate that said ABC instead of CBD, like, you know, whatever,
Yeah.
like, you know, but like someone says they won the lottery, right? That this individual person winning the lottery would be a very rare event. And so like I'm gonna need some evidence for that. Now, if you said someone won the lottery, well, that's not rare at all. Like people win the lottery all the time. So like, you know.
Okay, well, just to do what this will be my last, and then I'll give you the reins to kind of probe me or grill me. But this was so this kind of what you just said kind of reminds me a bit of an objection an atheist gives. It was a bit of a more nuanced one for the low prior prob, where he's trying to establish, well, look, God's MO appears to be his modus operandi is that he wants the universe to, in general, be governed by certain ordinary natural events and natural laws. This provides predictability and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to kind of co-op this. Like, wouldn't that kind of mitigate against what you're saying? If God did want the universe to obey natural laws for certain other purposes, and he did, obviously, he wanted those events to be miracle events, to be the extreme exception, because in general human beings, we are designed, we need that regularity for to live out our days and stuff like that. So couldn't sort of a divine psychology mo be co-opted to kind of counter what you were saying there?
Well, I mean, it could certainly explain it, but now you have to add that also into your model. Now it's no longer just a maximally great being, unless you could somehow work your way from maximally great to that. Then it's no longer just a maximally great being. It's maximally great being that also wants the world to work this way. So, like, yeah, you could work your model to accommodate that for sure. But like any model can accommodate any fact if you're willing to, you know, throw it enough into your presuppositions, right? So, like, that would necessarily reduce it from just whatever probability a mere maximally great being has. A maximally great being with another feature is going to be a subset of that probability, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So, all right, cool. So yeah, let me be fair here as the moderator, and over to you. You take over, and do you have questions or probing insights about my case?
Yeah. So at one point you mentioned that you think that God wants a maximum number of people to obtain their purpose, and I take that in this case their purpose is that they come to a relationship with this deity, probably something like that. Um, and he doesn't want undue confusion. So when you say undue confusion, what does that look like to you? What are you trying to communicate?
Yeah, so essentially, in the context of this, one example of undue confusion that's relevant to here would be, so let's say we do have an event that fulfills all my criteria for being a religion authenticating event. So, for example, the Shroud of Turin, right? I'm a reasonable real seeker, and I bought into this. I think it does fulfill those criteria, and on that basis, I'm concluding, yep, God wants me to follow Christianity, because that's the religion, the shroud evidence or the historical evidence for the resurrection, whatever the example is. So I'm now committing to that religion, believing God has endorsed it in order for me to achieve my ultimate purpose. Now, if that's not true, if Christianity is a bunch of horse manure and he's allowed me to be confused in this way, well, that's hindering unjustifiably on God's part, hindering me from achieving my ultimate purpose. I shouldn't be following this religion. I have to follow a different religion, or perhaps no religion at all, to achieve that. So that's what I would call undue confusion. It's confusion and it's undue on God. God should have prevented me from being confused in that way.
Okay. So this seems to be kind of skirting on the edges of kind of like a divine hiddenness sort of argument, which for anyone who's not familiar is basically the observation, they say, at least the argument goes, that God is hidden from most people, or at least some number of people. There are people who are, the wording is non-resistant non-believer. They would believe if they had sufficient evidence. They don't have that evidence. And, so why is God withholding the evidence? Basically, is the way it goes. And so it seems to me like you're saying that if God is the kind of being to intervene in the world and provide these signs of wonders to people, and he also wants a maximum number of people to get to this purpose, it seems like you're saying there are no non-resistant non-believers.
Pretty much, yeah. I would call them reasonable real seekers, but exactly right. Like this argument from this presupposition here is premise 9 in my 11 premise argument, where obviously I argue for it, but I'm co-opting an atheist argument. I think Michael Martin is the guy who first did it, or Theodore Drange also did it, right? So this was an atheist argument that basically said there's certain forms of confusion in the world. If God exists, he couldn't allow for this type of confusion, but it exists, therefore God doesn't exist. So I've kind of co-opted that and said, well, I'm going to use this insight because I think you're right that there are some forms of confusion that is undue. And I've used that to say, well, look, if there is a religion authenticating event that fulfills the criteria I've set up, there's no way God could allow that for a religion that's not conducive to me achieving my ultimate purpose. He, at least right now, he wants me to follow Christianity.
So I agree that a good God wouldn't allow that confusion. And, I guess where I disagree is I think he clearly has, maybe not in your life, but certainly in other people's lives. Like there's all kinds of people who don't believe in a deity, and I just find it seems to beggar belief that of the billions of people, whichever deity is right, there's the majority of people don't believe in that one, whichever one it is, right? And so it seems to me just beyond the pale to suggest that each and every single one of those people is a resistant non-believer. Like not a single one of them would come to belief if they were given some kind of sign or wonder. Like I can't say, I guess I don't have access to their brains to say for sure. It's just, man, that seems like a big ask.
You know what though? I don't find that convincing at all, because I do think it's very, I mean, it's really, really hard to be a reasonable, real seeker. Even I myself, some struggle. It's a constant struggle. I do think, again, speaking as a Christian a bit because of sin, but I regardless of whether that's true or not, most human beings are not reasonable, real seekers. If you get right into the nitty gritty, I mean, it's easy to say like, oh yeah, I'm open to evidence and stuff. But again, you have to get into the psychology and really evaluate, you actually that or not? And I think far less people than you think are actually qualified. But let me give you something here that sorry, you wanted to interrupt? I was
Go ahead.
But I will agree with you, because I think that it is possible. And so I suck. I should have qualified this. Because I think that it is possible at certain times there could be reasonable, real seekers, and yet God hasn't revealed the truth or revealed himself to these people. He hasn't done his duty, at least for certain times. For about 8 years, I was a non-Christian. I didn't know that Christianity was true, but there were at points during that time, at least, where I was a reasonable, real seeker, and yet God didn't do it. So I do qualify in that and say that, well, he has to reveal the truth to people before the point of no return, before that point at which you will not be able to achieve your ultimate purpose. And that can allow us up to the point of death, maybe arguably even after death. People are given an opportunity. So there is that qualification. So I never want to say that, yeah, well, no one's a reasonable real seeker. Well, I thought I was, and for years I didn't know that Christianity was true. So yeah, there could be some out there, but far less than I think you seem to imply.
Well, even if it's far less, if there's one, all it requires is one. And then at least God at that point isn't maximally great. He might be really, really great, but he's not maximally great. If he's like, if there's even one person, and that's like going all that way doesn't work for me. But so you did mention that you think that there's a cutoff. So I assume you're not some a universalist, for example,
No.
that would think that everyone gets saved. So like there is at some point, whether death or some point beyond it, where you can't go. And it would be, so am I characterizing you correctly that you think even if it happens after death, every person is given sufficient evidence to come to belief if they wish to? Would that be accurate?
Every person, not necessarily is given, well, yeah, I guess as a Christian, eventually on the day of judgment, they will be given sufficient evidence for sure, but not necessarily, right? So it's not about giving evidence. They will be given their fair shot to freely choose to be a real seeker. And at that point, then yes, God is obligated to give them the evidence. So they can choose to fulfill those criteria to be a real seeker or not. The other thing I just wanted to reply is, again, though, remember, I get what you're saying about God not being maximally great. Look, we should at all times be all reasonable real seekers at all time. Oh,
it's not even at all times. Like I could understand if for whatever inscrutable reason, he waits 10 years to tell Bob, but tells Sally today. Like, okay, fine.
okay.
But you'd have to believe that no reasonable seeker, no non-resistant non-believer, not a single one of those makes it to whatever the point of no return is without being given their fair shot, like you described it.
Yes,
and it has to be 100% of those.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's not maximally. But then you get into things like the geographic distribution of religions. It would seem, if let's say Christianity is true, that where you happen to be born seems to be a huge factor as to whether or not you are a Christian. And it seems implausible to me that people in India are just intrinsically less likely to be non-resistant non-believers. Apparently they're all like pig-headedly stubborn, because if they've all been, like, if everybody gets this fair shot, why is religion so like clustered? That doesn't seem to jive with what we know about humans. It's not like people from India or China or Saudi Arabia are intrinsically less reasonable than anybody else.
Yeah, so I think this is right. So this is why I think you have to adopt a religious inclusivist perspective, at least on the topic of soteriology. So people, let's just take people who've never heard the name Jesus. They could be reasonable real seekers and still be saved. So at this point, your question will be, well, then why is divine revelation necessary? If you can achieve your ultimate purpose without the divine revelation, you don't need it. So I think it's true, but it's still needed. Remember, God's ultimate purpose is, from a Christian standpoint, for as many people as possible, many reasonable real seekers as possible. And in order to maximize that number, he knows divine revelation is needed for me. In order for me to achieve my ultimate purpose and, the most number of people in all of creation over all of time, divine revelation was needed. But there are certain people it wasn't needed to, because I don't know, like there's people living before Jesus even existed. They don't need to believe Jesus rose from the dead, or there's people who've never heard of Jesus. They can be saved and still
There's a great sketch I saw where a guy's like mission goes to like an uncontacted tribe, and they like, oh, this thing. He's like, so I have to believe in this guy to be saved and go to heaven? It's like, yeah. Well, what happens if you hadn't come? Well, you go to heaven. Well, then why did you come? Like, I would have been fine.
Well, but it's not that simple, right? Because again, even these people, they always have this goal. They have to be reasonable. They have to be a real seeker in order to be saved. And even in these tribes, like how many of these people are actually real seekers and stuff? So it may be the only way to save some in that tribe is God knew, well, someone had to preach Christianity to those guys at that time.
So just to be clear, you're saying that while I presume you think being Christian guarantees your trip, you can be non-Christian and still be saved, even if you've like through whatever metric God chooses to judge people by.
Yep.
Well, that blunts the objection. I don't think it 100% solves it, because like if there's still an advantage given to Christians, like if being Christianity sets you up more for success, then you're still like there seems to be unequal opportunity being given, but at least it's not a difference between 100 and 0. So at least you bridged the gap something.
There we go. Take it.
Well, so we've gone a little. So we went into some God's character thing. But since we're talking about miracles, you presupposed for your argument that God exists, and then you went on the priors from there.
Yeah.
So, would you agree that if you don't already believe God exists, that that the evidence we have is insufficient to get you to a miracle? That you'd have to come to the conclusion that God exists for some other reason? Is that what you're trying to say, or not?
Absolutely. Yeah. If we are not warranted in believing, this is premise one in my argument, right? So, but here I'm just treating it as a presupposition for our debate. Yeah. If you don't believe in God, game over. Everything I just said is I mean, who's the designer then, right? So like, yeah, the whole thing falls apart if God doesn't exist.
So are you saying then that you would disagree with the McGrew approach that miracles should get you to faith? Is that what you're saying?
Get you to faith in God, you mean? Or?
Yeah. Like maybe you believe in like some, I don't know, like what's the role miracle plays, I guess is what I'm trying to get at in your mind.
I think so. Like I don't know. I'm skeptical. I'm kind of on your side. Like, okay, I'm open to the argument for God from miracles, but it hasn't worked for me. I haven't been persuaded by it, and so I'm a little bit skeptical of whether that you can establish God in general's existence from the evidence for miracles, because then you do get into issues of prior probability, perhaps, and stuff like that. So I just find it works better. Look, let's establish God exists, and this will help us out a heck of a lot when we're dealing with like the prior probability issue and stuff.
Well, honestly, I think that's the entire issue. Like, if someone wants to say, I can establish miracles, but only if you agree that God exists, and the evidence for miracles aren't going to get you there, we'll have to get you there some other way. I'm totally down with that. Like, if I believed that the Christian God existed, well, then the resurrection like is there. And even if I wasn't sure which God it was, but like, okay, the supernatural exists, I don't know exactly its nature, that still in my mind would raise the prior tremendously, right?
Agreed, but one thing, yeah. Again, remember, I'm not assuming the Christian God, because my argument here is that the purpose of miracles, or in this case, what I'm calling religion authenticating miracles, is to tell us: is it the Christian God? Is it the Muslim God? Is it the Hindu God, or is it no God? Like it may come out God exists, but He hasn't revealed anything to anyone. So like that could happen too. Yeah.
All right, I buy that if the evidence for miracles is insufficient to get you to a God belief, but miracles could help you to discriminate between different gods.
For sure.
Okay. So I believe I heard you say this in the video I watched, but that was like 3 years ago. So just in case you've changed your mind or whatever,
Okay.
you've mentioned.
You're asking me to be consistent. What's wrong with you? Come on now.
No, you definitely could have. If you had an interview with me from 10 years ago, I was a completely different person. So,
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah, I don't think I was even an atheist at that point. So, very different person. But in any case, so miracles from other faiths.
Okay.
Different faith traditions have their own miracle stories. And if I recall correctly, you said that if you could accept that some of them might be authentic, and either it be the case like Islam where like it works for both, or it could be done by Satan or some kind of being. Is that still accurate?
So I don't think so. If there's a religion authenticating miracle, I don't think it can work for both. So maybe you're just there's a question of which one gets it, right?
You may have been talking about just miracles in general, and not specifically religion authenticating miracles.
Yeah, I think that miracles of compassion can happen to atheists or to other religions. And in fact, in some cases, I think they probably have. I can cite some examples that I think, for example, from Lourdes. There's some cases, just a handful, where I'm like, yeah, I think something happened here, maybe. And yeah, so God can do miracles for any religious or even non-religious proponent for different reasons. But if it's for the purpose of a religion authenticating one, it dang well better be one, unless some kind of weird religious pluralism is true. In that case, I don't know what I'm doing. So,
well, it seems though that even like a religion of like a miracle doesn't necessarily have to fit in only one category. If it's a act of compassion and God cures someone with cancer, but He cured it for a Hindu person who conducted whatever rituals prescribed by their tradition, and God is like, have compassion for this person. I'm gonna boom, there you go. Like, you're wrong about your beliefs, but I'm gonna grant your wish. Wouldn't that serve the purpose of mistakenly authenticating that person's belief in the wrong deity? It seems like you could run into trouble there.
um, so okay, no, your question I think is, let's say God had multiple purposes, multiple specifications, to use intelligent design thing. One was for the purpose of compassion. Hey, God is caring and loving. He loves this guy. And additionally, he's also authenticating a given religion, such as, Jesus healing someone. Okay, well, Jesus is a religious founder, the religious founder of Christianity, and this particular miracle happens in the Bible, which is said to be the inspired text of Christianity or something like that. You could make the argument, as long as it fulfills these criteria, then you would, yeah, that is entirely possible and not really a problem. It doesn't lead to confusion, right? Because you still have, yeah, it can serve. Go ahead.
It doesn't if like Jesus is doing it and he's the actual like he's correct. But I'm talking like you were mentioning doing miracles for people in other religions. Wouldn't that run the risk of authenticating their mistaken belief? Like, because what they saw, the person who's a Hindu saw, I prayed to my Hindu deity or deities and got a thing. That would seem to authenticate their belief, but that's authenticating the wrong belief.
So that I think is very loosey goosey, right? So I think that you could prove that it's sufficiently attached to a religion if you're a Hindu and you're praying to a Hindu god, and then you get healed. I think it would have to be especially right away, right? Like you gave one example where you wait a week. That's even more tenuous. Let's just say it happens instantly the moment you pray. I think you could prove that that's sufficiently attached to the religion, but it's questionable. Does it actually serve to authenticate? You'd have to, because again, that could easily be a miracle of compassion, and we can't get inside God's head. I just know, hey, I prayed to the Hindu god and I'm healed, and the Hindu god can heal me without saying necessarily that he's real or that the Hindu religion is real. Or
the Hindu god. So what? I don't have access to God's goals or whatever. Like maybe when he did this, it wasn't the purpose. God's purpose was not to authenticate any religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just viewing it like if I pray to a deity and then boom, I get the thing. I could totally see that would increase my confidence and apparently increase my confidence in the wrong thing. Whether or not that was the goal of the deity or not, the deity's action gave me mistaken information. Or I don't think it's unreasonable to interpret that in the wrong way, and so wouldn't that seem to lead to that confusion that the deity is supposed to be trying to avoid?
So I think in that case, this is where a uniqueness criterion could come in to play, even for the lesser standard of the reasonable real seeker. I think okay, maybe the very close association and the fact that you specifically prayed to a specific god, okay, let's say for the sake of argument that a real seeker would be reasonable in saying, well, that is serving to authenticate Hinduism. But then the reasonable real seeker is still obligated to find out, well, is this event unique for specifically this Hindu god? And that's where they're going to find out, no, this happens for Christians praying to the Christian god, for Muslims, that there are abundance of things. And in that way, I think the reasonable real seeker would say, well, I don't think we can establish this is serving to authenticate. It's, something extraordinary happened. I was healed after in a religious context. But because it's not unique to one religion, we can't say it's an authenticating thing because, yeah.
Okay, so you would say that people who use miracles that are not, we'll say generic miracles because they happen in multiple traditions, that they would be incorrect in using that as evidence to differentiate their religion because other traditions have those stories as well. Would that be?
Well, just to qualify, and it's not just that they have the stories, that's irrelevant, but I'm presuming they have
the events,
provable examples like that. This actually happened in a different religious tradition. That would be
okay. I guess it still seems like, I don't know, like I get what you're saying. Like ideally the person would say, well, yeah, I did this, I prayed to that deity, I was healed, but maybe it's some other deity that just had pity on me even though I'm wrong. Like that is a place where you can go there, but it seems to me like God would owe that person some more like help because like I don't know, I don't want to get hung up on it. It just seems like if that happened to me, like I get Christians who tell me all the time like why they believed that there's a guy I used to talk to, Titus used to be on the show, and one of the things he'd give miraculous healings of people he knew, and this is why I believe in the Christian God. And so clearly there are people who take these generic miracles as authentication. Now perhaps that's not the most rigorous thing to do, but in some sense it seems like God has to meet us where we are. Like not every person is necessarily the most rigorous person.
I agree, but I think again it's a semi-objective standard. There is some element of relativism where I would agree with you that this is why I'm kind of doing it. Not everyone's the most rigorous, but I would still argue that's being unreasonable, I think, because I think the reasonable person, legal definition, the average person, average intelligence, that they would be aware of other religions and similar claims. And this should prompt the reasonable person to at least ask the question and do some appropriate level of investigation for whatever their best abilities are. And if that happens, I think they'll discover that, yeah, there are at least one or two, or at least God's obligated to help them to discover that there are at least one or two, if this isn't a religion authenticating event.
So just to get to a point of agreement, would you agree that miraculous healings in and of themselves are not good candidates for a religion? I forget your exact terms. The authenticating miracle.
I think I do agree with that, because I do see cases that I'm convinced fulfill this chart for being a complex or extraordinary event in different religious traditions. So I'm not sure we can establish that miracle healings authenticate a given religion.
Okay. I've got one other thing that's a bit of a minor point, but you mentioned, I think it's even on this slide, that the event in question would not be possible, would be extremely unlikely or whatever, sufficiently unlikely to not be possible or whatever under currently well-known / established mechanisms.
Yeah.
Now, I agree that we can't be held responsible. Like, you shouldn't have to posit exotic, fundamentally different physics. For example, the whole rearranging the stars in the sky. Perhaps there's some exotic physics that could explain that, but that seems like well beyond the pale, right?
Well, here's an example. I'll just throw in a quick example. Like, so here's an example where the relativity might come in, right? For the reasonable real seeker, I don't think any reasonable real seeker in the year 1700 had to consider quantum physics explanations. They just couldn't. It would have been impossible to do that. Although I would say that perhaps the reasonable real seeker today is obligated to consider those to the best of their ability today, kind of thing, because, well, quantum physics, at least in some kind of vague sense, it is well known and well established that there's quantum weirdness. So that would just give an example of where there could be relativity there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can be a reasonable, rational person doing good skepticism and still come to wrong conclusions if you just don't have access to the full information. So like if somebody is in the wrong conclusion because in 1700 because they need quantum mechanics to come to the right conclusion, it's not their fault. But I guess I would only draw a caution under the well-known or well-established, because like you said, physics is constantly changing. And so you have to be, I think, tread carefully with the well-established thing, because, for example, abiogenesis, the mechanism behind that is not well established. It's still an unknown, right? But I think that's different in character or degree, at least, to something like, I don't know, something that would explain a regrown arm that would like violate thermodynamics. Like that's a very different thing to, we have some pieces that might suggest a solution, but it's not well established. We could be wrong, you know. I think I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I would just caution people to like say to avoid falling into a God of the gaps where they're like playing around the edges of our known understanding versus like something that would contradict our understanding. Like if something would completely violate the second law of thermodynamics, then that's a miracle as far as I'm concerned. You know,
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I forget who said it. Was it Feynman? It's the most well-established thing. Like somebody had a good.
It was if your theory contradicts Newton, you know, that's excellent. If your theory contradicts Einstein, well done. If your theory contradicts thermodynamics, I could offer you no hope.
Look at this smart man. Just knows the quote. He's trying to look cool there, man. But yeah, and one thing I just want to oh shoot, I'm forgetting it. I had an interesting So one good point about my my 11 premise argument in general and these religion authenticating events. I'm very careful in my argument not to necessarily assume that the religion that God authenticates has to actually be true. Again, I believe that, and I believe I could argue for that, but I don't think it's necessary. So why on earth get into a debate if I don't have to? All that's needed is that God needs to accomplish this goal of as many humans achieving their ultimate purpose. And in order to do that, he just has to show us which religion he authenticates in the sense of endorsing, hey, at this time, Dale, this is what I want you to believe. Maybe 30 years from now, we learn something totally, we get new, currently well-established ordinary natural mechanisms we can't even conceive of today. And that totally explains naturally the shroud. Okay, I will no longer be a Christian. I followed it as long as God wanted me to for 30 years. But now he's revealing, look, the shroud is not a miraculous event or something like that in reality. So I just wanted to clarify that in my argument here, I'm taking away my Christian theism and saying Christianity is true. All my argument here proves technically is that God endorses this religion at this time for you to follow in order to achieve your purpose.
I mean, as long as he's not going to throw me in a lake of fire for all eternity for doing what he wanted me to do, then I'm fine with that, I guess. It's not how I'd run things if I were God, but I mean, as long as everything works out in the end, I guess it's all right.
Well, again, and that's not what I believe. Like I would argue no, and what God endorses has to be true if he's a real maximum great being. But it's just that I didn't want to assume that because it's not needed. Maybe God can use false beliefs for the sake of argument.
So you mentioned the shroud, and I don't want to derail this entire thing into a shroud of Turin debate.
Mhm.
But we said we came to, I think, an agreement earlier that you'd need to, in order to accept miracles like we're likely to actually witness, you need to come with a God belief. Would that apply in your mind to the Shroud of Turin?
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
There's four reasons I came to believe that Christianity is the religion God endorses. So one was the historical evidence for the resurrection, specifically only the appearance to the quote unquote 12. That's the only fact that I think would qualify as a religion authenticating event. All the other, the empty tomb, the other appearances, I think have equally probable ordinary natural mechanisms. The shroud is the second, the formation of the shroud's images. And then I have a vindication, or what I call the vindication prediction argument. Those are the three objective religion authenticating events. The fourth is a subjective inner witness of the Holy Spirit, which doesn't apply to this.
Okay. So just out of curiosity, without, let's say you didn't have that inner witness of the Holy Spirit, would
Okay.
that not have been enough to put you over the finish line?
The shroud by itself.
What the other three factors that you mentioned? You had four factors that led you to Christianity. One of them was the inner witness of the Holy Spirit. It may be difficult to parse. You may not know, but if you didn't have that, if you just had the other three, do
No,
you think that would have been enough?
So I can tell you with absolute certainty, at the time of my conversion, they would not have been enough, because with the four factors, I was at 53.14% overall for Christianity, and I would have definitely been below 50% if you took out the inner witness of the Holy Spirit at that time.
Mhm.
Now, where I am today, I might not need it, but I haven't recalculated stuff. So I'm working on updating my Shroud of Turin chapter, and it's going to be stronger than where I was. At the time I converted, it was around between 67 and 72%, somewhere in that range, I believe, off the top of my head. But I think it would be higher now, in the high 70s to early 80s. But I haven't done the calculation, so I don't know.
I have to say that I definitely respect Christians who are willing to express a level of uncertainty. I think that shows intellectual humility and honesty. Michael Kona is another one who I recall has said, at least at some point in his life, I'm about 70% sure. And I remember when I was like, whoa, 70%. Holy cow, that is way lower than I would have expected.
Yeah.
So,
I get wide eyes every time I mention the 53.14, two decimal places, right? So,
well,
yeah.
I mean, technically, if you think that something's over 50% likely, you should believe it. At least, may not believe it with a lot of confidence, but
Thank you. Get this pragmatic encroachment out of here. God, geez,
yeah,
I was talking
50.1%.
50.01. There's my
Yeah,
there's the probability bound, right? So,
yeah. For me, while I'd say that, yeah, if I could calculate it to 50.1%, I'd believe it because it's over 50. However, practically speaking, I'm a squishy human, and like getting that number, I'd be very suspect if I came to a number of 50.1. I'd be like, did I nudge the scale somehow? Like I'd be a little skeptical of myself.
there's
But
always that standard deviation, right? So
yeah, I mean, there's always sorts of error in whatever you're talking about. So when it comes to like the inner witness of the Holy Spirit,
Mhm.
is that something that I at this point I think we basically agree on miracles? So I'm
Okay.
just talking.
Let me get stop sharing there. Okay. Yeah.
Well, if you have something else before I like start taking us on a weird tangent.
No, I think we covered it. I think this was good and helpful and stuff. So yeah.
So with the inner witness of the Holy Spirit, is that something that you think that everybody gets, or is that something that like God parcels out according to his inscrutable purposes? Or
So on one level, I believe theologically that everybody gets it, right? So the Holy Spirit does have a role for even unbelievers, right? And I think the Bible says he convicts you of your sin, right? That you've done immoral stuff. And there's a couple other things that I'm just off the top of my head I can't remember, but yeah, he does have a role for everyone. And what essentially what he does is he plays an enabling role. But his ability to enable you is limited or restricted based on your free will and willingness to be a real seeker, right? So what you've got to do, if you're a real seeker, the Holy Spirit can help you out in his time. He can, have you seen the show with me and David Johnson, the atheist, where we,
I don't
okay,
think so.
there's an inside joke, right? Where basically, because of sin, I believe human beings to varying degrees are a bunch of rusty nuts. And the Holy Spirit comes around and he has rust remover or something like that. But he can only use it to the degree that you will allow him via choosing to be a real seeker. So there are some people that are just so hard of heart, he can't do anything to help you. So, he can't enable you to believe in God or believe in Jesus or something until you change that. So that's the role I see there. Then if you are a reasonable real seeker and it's the appropriate time, remember God's only obligated up to the point of no return. So for me, that was May 5th, 2018. Then they produce properly basic beliefs that Christianity is true or whatever the proposition is, Islam is true, whatever. For me, obviously, the Holy Spirit would authenticating Christianity was true. And that's in the form of a properly basic belief.
So I wonder why anyone needs to be a reasonable real seeker at all, or like have a particular like mental disposition. I mean, I suppose there could be somebody for whom no amount of evidence would be sufficient. I mean, that may be the case, and in which case, I guess it doesn't matter what God does. But it seems like if God is omniscient and omnipotent, then he both knows what would convince me and is capable of giving me that evidence, whatever it is. And so, and that would be the case for everyone except for this hypothetical person for whom there is nothing. Like, why wouldn't he just give that to them? Like,
I don't think that is possible. So one thing just to clarify, because the reasonableness part, even though that's a requirement for these religion authenticating miracles, all that's required for the inner witness of the Holy Spirit is to be a real seeker. You don't even have, you could be the most unreasonable person on the face of the earth, and the Holy Spirit can get through to you if you're spiritually receptive as a real seeker. So that now, why would I have to be a real seeker? Why do I have to be open-minded? Why do I have to be actively seeking? And why do I have to be willing to obey or follow the truth upon discovery? And I just argue that this kind of spiritual disposition is necessary in order for the redeeming work, in order to be redeemed or have your sins atoned for, and Jesus to accomplish the sanctifying results. I don't think it's possible for God to just redeem you unless you have this spiritual disposition to receive him. So that's why.
So another friend of mine has told me that he believes that people like don't get a doubting Thomas moment. Every person doesn't get God saying, "Hi, I'm God. Nice to meet you."
Yeah.
Because he says that would take away their free will. Just curious, and that seems ridiculous to me, but I was curious what your take was on that.
Totally ridiculous. So that's like Richard Swinburne's argument. I was just talking to Tyler Vela, and this was an objection he bring, right? So like that version of the free will defense, no, we can have free will and there's
and
no
have information, right? Like there's no having information doesn't stop you from having free will.
Exactly. That's ridiculous. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe I should show my friend this clip.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, I think that's a terrible argument, right?
I agree. Like it seems to me, I can certainly imagine, like, so take me for instance. I would love it if a benevolent deity existed, particularly if that deity is going to tell me I'm never going to die, because I super don't want to die, and so like that would be awesome. Like I would love for that to be true. I would like to think that if this deity is actually a moral monster and it's just a demon, I would like to think that I'd have the intestinal fortitude not to bow down out of just fear. So I could imagine like situations where like but then I'm like I don't see how me knowing that this God exists exists means that I must therefore submit, right? Like I could imagine situations where I'd at least not want to submit. So
Yeah, like an evil god or something like that. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I agree with that. So perfect. Yeah,
there we go. I mean, I guess we're just waiting for God to give me my dose of whatever it is, you know.
I was gonna say, that the sign would have been if David Russell actually made it on time and showed up. But yeah,
That would have been a miracle. Yeah.
that would have been with Russell definitely. But yeah, I don't know. I think we kind of covered it all. Is there anything we missed?
So just to summarize what I think we agreed on, that miracles by themselves are not going to be sufficient to warrant belief. But if you already believe in a deity, it could tell you which deity you should go for. Like it can be a differentiator between deities, but in and of itself, they're not going to get you from atheist to
Like you're
believer.
saying, unless you already presuppose God.
Right.
Yeah, we definitely agree. I agree on that. I'm open that I might be wrong and Lydia McGrew's right, but I'm very skeptical. I'm more on your side than hers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you agree with that, then at that point it's like, okay, we can shelve the whole miracle thing and talk to me about this other stuff that's supposed to convince me. And then, then we can come back to the whether like I'll worry about which God is real once I'm convinced that a God is real. Like I'll cross that bridge when I get there.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, let's do the next time we get together. Let's do a debate on okay, does God exist then? And
yeah, there we go. Sounds great.
Awesome.
Look at that. We had a debate and we agreed at the end. That's a miracle right there. That if anything is a miracle, that is. Two people on the internet agreed on something.
So this week, I am 2 for 2 with atheists here. So this is amazing. Because I had David Johnson on from Skeptics and Seekers, and we had a great conversation on my 11 premise argument. So that's where we kind of covered everything. And then today, we just kind of covered premise 8 and a little bit on premise 7 and 9. So yeah, this has been great. Let me just check the comments. Do you see any questions? My sunglasses match.
I didn't see any questions. There are several people doing what's the thing where you like do math and like compare it to a Bible verse? There's a name for it. I don't remember. A couple of that.
Oh, yeah, the vulture. So yeah, we've had him on the show. His name's David, and he believes in Bible codes or numerical patterns in the Bible as proof. And he knows I'm very skeptical of it. And guess what? I apply specified complexity because this is a straightforward statistical claim. And that's kind of the calculation. Let me share my screen here just because I didn't get into it to save time. But there's actually a mathematical formula. If you guys, and David's familiar with my advice on this, but it's right here in yellow. Look, so in this case,
sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm not. Hang on. I need to see. This is why David Russell needs to be here. You seeing it now?
Yep.
So you see this calculation right here is how we get the complexity. I didn't apply this in the case of miracles because not every miracle is a straightforward statistical claim. I don't think we need statistical probabilities. But in the case of these numerical patterns, this is a straightforward statistical claim. So I do think you need to follow. So P is kind of the straightforward probability, right? So what's the probability of rolling a 3 on a die? Well, it's 1 out of 6, right? That 1/6. But you also have to take into account the probabilistic resources. So the K here refers to specificational resources. So if I specify not just rolling a 3, but rolling a 3 or rolling a 5, either of those counts as a hit. Well, that's going to increase the odds, isn't it? It's going to be at least 2/6 now, right? And also there's to the exponent of n. N refers to the replicational resources. Again, this increases your odds. So let's say, okay, I'm specifying I get a hit if I either roll a 3 or a 5, but I don't just roll the dice once. I get to roll it 3 times or 4 times. This is all going to raise the likelihood. And this is kind of the Achilles heel, whether it's Islam or anyone kind of doing these numerical patterns. I never see people accounting for these resources that are available.
So if you're good at math and you love it, you become a mathematician. If you're bad at math, you become a business major. But if you're good at math and hate it, you're an engineer. And so, like, the way that I would describe this to a fellow idiot is like, if you allow me unlimited tries, I can get anything done. If
Mhm.
right. And so you always have to take into account how many attempts you get to do anything that's possible, and how, if you paint the target wide enough, I can always hit it. And so, like, any holy book is going to be huge. It's going to have so many different letters and words, and obviously there's infinite numbers. And so, like, if you can combine these things to come out with any answer you want, and at the end imbue it with significance. And so, like 53.14 for the, like, I don't know. Like, I'm with you. It seems
Those
like,
are subjective, and I'm fully admitting all my probabilities are subjective normative probability
well, yeah,
values.
I mean,
Values.
realistically, for almost everything, like, I might do Bayesian analysis just to help myself process through my own subjectivity. But,
Mhm.
like, someone like Richard Carrier makes this mistake all the time, I think, where, like, they apply a number and then they use it's like, oh, look, I did math. Like, yeah, but it's just subjective. Like, it's no less subjective because you put numbers to it. It's just like,
Yeah. Here, okay, well, I agree in what you're saying, but here's where I disagree. So I've told atheists this before, because they just say it's totally subjective, and therefore there's no point in doing it. Here's why I think it is. So there is the GIGO one problem, right? Garbage in, garbage out,
mhm,
in terms of the value, the subjective values themselves. Sure, I'm presenting my objective reasons. Anyone can assess that. But at the end of the day, yeah, it is going to be kind of my subjective values. And if those are garbage, I would argue I am being a reasonable
mhm,
person at least. But let's say you totally agree and everything's garbage. Great. So then I have a garbage result. But what do I avoid in doing it using Bayes' theorem and stuff? I avoid the GIGO 2 problem, which is, rather than just, okay, I've got my subjective values and now I'm just going to subjectively jumble them in my head to
yeah,
make an overall judgment. I don't have that problem. My
I agree.
cumulative thing, yeah, you get what I'm saying. So
Yeah, I have argued this a couple of times with people, and, like, on the one hand, your assigning numbers to your subjective judgments does not make them less subjective. What it can do is, like you said, prevent you from falling into bias traps where, like, you don't humans are really, really bad at, like, assessing large bulks of evidence, and so it can help you kind of sort through that in a rigorous way so you don't inadvertently, like, commit an error, even if all it does is like, huh, I did all that and it came to 70%. That seems really high. Did I make a mistake? It could at least, like give you some kind of framework to work off of. And what it can also do is help communicate to other people. When I say it's very likely, I mean 70%, 80%, 50, whatever, it can
honestly,
help with that.
honestly, Joy, you must be my atheist brother from another mother, because for years, I have been scolded. Nobody's gotten it. I've explained it to it, but you just get it like that. Like, exact. That's what I
I
use
use
Bayes
I use
for.
Bayes theorem all the time. I love it. It's one of my and I didn't even come to it from, like, from the religious talks. I was introduced to Bayes theorem in a PRA, in a probabilistic risk assessment class.
Oh wow. Okay.
So, like, I was already used to, like, using it to solve actual real world problems. Then when someone was like, "Oh, you can also use it for history," I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense." Like, so it wasn't like, you know,
Awesome. Yep. Nope. I totally agree. Okay. I don't see any questions. Somebody. Oh, you liked it except for the bow tie. That's you,
no, no.
right?
I said I liked for the bow tie. That's why I liked it, because
Okay.
somebody on the video has a dapper bow tie.
Perfect. All right. Well, if some free marketing. Joyful Matthew says this channel needs more exposure. Hit the thumbs up. Yep, I definitely
And
agree.
the algorithm only speaks one language, and that's engagement. So hit the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Spoiler, the algorithm doesn't care. You engaged either way. So just,
There you go. There you go. Well, okay. So here's something I should clarify. So the conviction of the Holy Spirit is a miracle. Now, in one sense, I would agree fully. Like, the inner witness of the Holy Spirit and properly based beliefs are technically, those are also religion authenticating events. But I just kind of separate them out. They're not quote unquote religion authenticating events under the definition of, under the sense of the word I was using it today. I just separate those out. But at large, yeah, properly basically allow me to, God helps me to authenticate. Well, this religion, not that. So in the general sense of the words, yes, I agree. But I had a specific meaning for religion authenticating event that that the Holy Spirit was outside of for tonight.
When it comes to that, my view is I'd borrow from Thomas Paine when he said that revelation is revelation for the first person only, and for everyone else it's hearsay. Like, revelation like, I accept that there could be somebody who is given direct divine revelation, and that means that their belief is perfectly reasonable and rational, and I just don't have access to that. Could be. I don't have access to it, so I can't assess it. If someone tells me that I have a direct witness that convinces me that God exists, well, there's no way I can possibly refute that because I don't have access to your internal lived experience. So maybe you do. The only caution I'd throw for somebody is I'd point to apostates like myself and others who will say, well, I felt like I had that, and now I don't think I did. Now looking back, I have experienced similar feelings in different contexts or whatever. And so it could be that they never had it to begin with and they were just wrong the whole time. It could be. Like, I can't say for sure because, again, I can't reach into your skull and see. But I would just be hesitant myself, given like other people are verbalizing things that are similar to what I'm verbalizing.
Mm-hmm.
They may be different, but I don't know. Maybe they're the same. That would cause me to have some doubts. But
Gotcha. All right, cool. Well, as far as, again, my stupid glasses are foggy, but I think that's it.
I think
last call. Do you guys have any specific questions for me or Jordan in the last 5 minutes or so?
About miracles, nuclear power, radiation, whatever you want.
Your choice. Yep. Now's the chance. If not, we will. Yeah. Well, I think. Okay.
All right. Great.
Awesome. Well, yeah, great night tonight, and thanks for coming on, and thanks to the fans for being here. And I'll be, like I said, I'll be taking a break at least for the month of August on the Faith Unaltered podcast. There may be there are a couple of announcements kind of thing as well. So I may have one show in August, depending. So an atheist named Godless Girl. I don't know if you know her. She's kind of famous on Clubhouse and Discord, and that she's kind of she's always been an atheist for years, where she'll debate Christians, but like Matt Slick, but she'll also debate atheists as well. But she's recently come out as believing in God, based on a personal experience with God. So if I'm able to get her on, I do want to interview her about that, because that is very important. The other major announcement is Shroud of Turin related. So Guy Powell was on Capturing Christianity today, advancing the case for the Shroud of Turin, which is great. 200,000 people is great to get that.
It was my Twitter science friends chat was throwing it at me like, oh, looks like you got to make another video.
There you go. Well, you may have another one too. I'm asking Guy if he can get me on as well, because I do want to present my case, or if not me, then maybe some experts that, Hugh Ferry versus other people, Bob Rucker, Joe Marino, or people like that, Barry Schwartz. So yeah, that's it. So have a great night, everybody, and take care. There we go.